What could be the reason that even after becoming the largest oil producer in the world, the United States still cannot fully use its own oil? It's almost like a farmer who grows crops on his own land, yet when he wants to use those crops, he still has to stand in front of someone else with folded hands. Because in the world we live in, what we see in front of you and the reality behind it are often very different. In the same way, every year millions of containers travel from China to the United States. But why does America sometimes end up leaving many of those containers unused, like piles of metal? And in the middle of all this, how did Iran manage to smuggle Boeing 777 aircraft right in front of the entire world? So in today's episode, let's uncover this fascinating story. Across the world's oceans, millions of ships are constantly moving, and on their shoulders rests nearly 90% of the global economy. At any given moment, thousands of container ships are crossing vast oceans, each carrying thousands of steel boxes. The clothes you wear, the phone you hold in your hand at some point, they were inside one of these containers. From a distance, everything seems perfectly balanced. Containers arrive, filled with goods, and the empty ones return back. It looks like a perfectly planned system, but in reality, hidden inside this global flawless, an imbalance so massive that it might leave you stunned. And as always, if you enjoy discovering such surprising stories, make sure to subscribe to our channel and follow the page. Anyway, over the past few decades, China has essentially become the factory of the world. Its massive exports and relatively smaller imports built an enormous trade empire. But when those mountains of containers reach the ports of Europe and the United States, that's where the real problem begins. Even when all European countries are combined, their trade profits are still far smaller compared to China. And in the more unusual, the US is the largest consumer market in the world. It imports huge quantities of goods, but exports far less. As a result, when containers arrive from China, only about 40% of them return with goods inside. But then the question arises, what happens to the remaining 60%? It's not that all of them return empty, because sending an empty container back to China is actually very expensive. Shipping a single empty container can cost nearly $3,000, while also occupying valuable space on the ship. Yet that same space could have generated tens of thousands of dollars if it carried a fully loaded container. And here's another interesting fact. China can manufacture a brand new container for roughly $2,000. So for many companies, sending the old containers back simply isn't worth it. The result? Every year, millions of new containers are produced, while countless old ones remain scattered around ports and cities, slowly rusting away. Some people buy them cheaply and turn them into storage units or small houses. Others melt them down to extract the steel. But a huge number of them remain completely unused. These rusting mountains of steel stand silently, a symbol of the imbalance in global trade. Now, on the other side of global trade lies another mystery, the mystery of American oil. Today, the United States produces more oil than any other country on Earth. Yet strangely, it still cannot fully use its own oil. The first reason lies in the type of oil. Most of the oil produced in the United States is light crude, oil thin and less dense, but the majority of American refineries were originally designed to process heavy crude oil. For decades, the US imported heavier oil from countries like Mexico and Venezuela, so the refining infrastructure was built specifically for that type of oil. Now, converting those refineries to process light crude instead would require more than $200 billion in investment, and that kind of transformation cannot happen overnight. So instead, the US often exports its lighter oil at higher prices and imports heavier oil at lower prices. The second reason is an infrastructure problem. The places where oil is discovered and extracted are not always connected properly to the refineries. For example, Texas is rich with massive oil fields, but there aren't enough pipelines to efficiently transport that oil to refineries on the East Coast. Even a state like California lacks sufficient pipeline infrastructure. Because of this, nearly 70% of California's fuel still depends on imports. So even though oil exists beneath American soil, it cannot always reach the places where it is needed. Now, if we shift our focus to the world of sanctions and geopolitical restrictions, another dramatic story appears. For many years, Iran has been under strict sanctions imposed by the United States. Because of these sanctions, Iran is not supposed to buy or sell many goods from the US or its allies. Yet surprisingly, Iran's private airline, Mahan Airstill, operates several American Boeing and European Airbus aircraft. So how is that possible? The answer sounds almost like the plot of a thriller movie. Around 2024-2025, 5 Boeing 777 aircraft suddenly appeared in Iran. Originally, these aircraft belonged to Singapore Airlines. For a long time, they had been sitting abandoned in the deserts of Australia. Iran could not purchase them directly because of the sanctions. So first, a US-based company bought the aircraft. Later, on paper, the planes were sold to 2 companies registered in Madagascar and Cambodia. But here's the twist. Those companies did not actually exist. They were shell companies, created purely to bypass sanctions. Once the aircraft were officially transferred to these foreign entities, they were no longer under direct US jurisdiction. Then, the planes filed flight plans, claiming they were heading to Kenya for maintenance. But once they entered the airspace near Afghanistan, their transponders were suddenly turned off, making them disappear from radar. Instead of Kenya, the aircraft quietly changed course and landed at airports inside Iran. By the time authorities around the world realized what had happened, the planes had already joined the fleet of Mahan Air, and legally, there was little the United States could do, because on paper, Iran's name appeared nowhere in the transaction. Everything had been done through third parties. Stories like these remind us that the global economy is far more complex than it appears. Decisions made thousands of miles away can affect our everyday lives. So, the next time you hear someone talk about rising oil prices or shortages of goods, remember, behind those headlines lies a complicated story of ships, laws, and international diplomacy.